violated our territorial integrity, and insulted our sovereignty. More recently, there has been a series of terror attacks culminating in the violence and murder at the Westgate Mall in September last year, and the murders once again early this morning in Mandera. These terrorist attacks in Kenya have so far claimed the lives of more than 500 civilians and 300 security officers. After decades of horror, fear, outrage, and frustration, we resolved as a nation to protect our sovereignty by pursuing our enemies beyond our borders into Somalia. By mid-2011, it had become abundantly clear that our long border with an ungoverned territory, teeming with violent criminals, was a threat to our national stability. Joining military efforts to bring peace to Somalia was the inevitable answer to our terror and security threats. In October 2011, the government authorized the KDF to pursue Al-Shabaab militia into Somalia. This decision was right then and remains so today. Following requests by regional, continental, and global actors, KDF joined AMISOM in February 2012. To date, we remain part of the African Union mission. The incursion in Somalia has been largely successful. Al-Shabaab is depleted and on the retreat. However, even in its diminished state, it remains a threat to our nation. In desperation, Al-Shabaab formally affiliated itself in 2012 to Al-Qaeda, the international terrorist group. This way, they secured resources and the ability to infiltrate civilian populations and recruit, then radicalize Kenyan youth to execute attacks within our communities. This is why we have witnessed intensified extremist rhetoric against the KDF campaign in Somalia, as well as support for murder and impunity. This reprehensible rhetoric has embraced Al-Qaeda's extremist ideas of setting up an Islamic caliphate in Eastern Africa. Places of worship have become fertile places for recruitment, and several mosques have been in the past taken over by radicalized terrorist sympathizers and accomplices. Dear Kenyans, all recent attacks bear the terrorist signature. Last week's bus attack was accompanied by the same typical terrorist rhetoric. A few months ago, the attack in Lamu, bearing the same hallmarks. And last night, a terrorist attack that would have wrought unspeakable devastation was successfully repulsed in Wajir. And early this morning, the attack in Mandera left 36 Kenyans dead. These attacks follow a pattern identical to the attacks on Christians in Lamu, the sporadic attacks in Mombasa, Kwale, Garissa, and Tana River. The obvious intent is to create hostility and suspicion across ethnic and religious lines, and to drive non-Muslims from certain parts of this country. The ultimate aim of this atrocious campaign is to establish an extremist caliphate in our region. Dear Kenyans, the time has come for each and every one of us to decide and choose. Are you on the side of an open, free, democratic Kenya which respects the rule of law, sanctity of life, and freedom of worship? Or do you stand with a repressive, intolerant, and murderous extremists. Dear Kenyans, terrorism and violent crime are a grave threat to our nation. We are in a war against terrorists in and outside our country. With the aid of sympathizers, supporters, and collaborators among our communities, terrorists have retaliated viciously to deter us from our determined, effective, and successful effort to rid the Horn of Africa of terrorism and violent extremism. We will not flinch or relent in the war against terrorism in our country and our region. We shall continue to inflict painful casualties on these terrorists until we secure our country and region. Our stability and prosperity depends on a secure neighborhood, and this is our commitment. We ask every Kenyan to take a principled stand against the evil of terror and to support this war. We are in this together. Innocent Kenyan lives have been lost in a most harrowing manner to these animals. Too many lives, too painfully snuffed out. Again, I extend condolences to the families of all Kenyans who have lost their lives in the hands of terrorists. My government continues to extend support to you, and we pray that God gives you his divine solace and comforts each of you in this painful moment. In our shock, bitterness, and outrage, many Kenyans, leaders included, have lost sight of the context of this situation and the scale of the war on terror. Kenya is at war, and our enemy thrives on sowing panic and despondency in our hearts. We aid this enemy when we succumb to suspicion, fear, finger-pointing, and blame games. Terrorist efforts bear fruit 100-fold when we see things their way, with countenances of fear, anger, and despair. We become their unwitting accomplices when we doubt, and we come to their aid when we shout at each other. This is a war against Kenya and Kenyans. It is not a war against the Jubilee government or its leaders. It is a war that every one of us must fight. Our bickering only emboldens the enemy. Our national conversation, whatever its temper, is facilitated by our media. The media must step back from being an inert funnel of sentiments, opinions, and messages and become a true mediator and an honest broker of the national discourse. The media must not allow intemperate, intolerant, divisive, alarmist, and stigmatizing views. Ideas that profile and victimize communities and individuals serve the precise aims of our enemies. Media serving as a platform for incendiary and toxic interaction is dangerous for our nationhood. Media, I urge the media to help Kenya develop a sober, bipartisan consensus on matters of national importance, where we may confer as a national family without sacrificing our democracy, freedom of opinion, or robust debate. Fellow Kenyans, I must address myself at this point to our Muslim community. Muslims are a hard-working and peaceful community. Their contribution to nation building is indispensable. We ask you to continue standing with your country and compatriots, as always, and not to give in to the desire of terrorists who wish to use your religion to manipulate and coerce all of us Kenyans. all Kenyans understand Islam to be a religion of peace because Allah is all gracious and merciful. Without a doubt, terrorists who claim to kill in the name of Allah are neither Muslims nor godly people, but rather deranged animals who have lost their souls and minds. We call on you to stay true to your religious tradition of tolerance and respect for all people. We depend on your support in our war against violent extremism and terror. I also want to reach out in a special way to our county governments, and especially those counties who border Somalia. Let us never forget that as leaders, we are all sworn to protect the sovereignty of this nation. I remind you of your responsibility to work with the national government in keeping our country and people safe. Your interaction with the grassroots places you at a vantage point for purposes of preventing attacks and peace building within and among our communities. As always, we will keep a listening ear at all times to take your input on board. Let us all pull together as one nation to confront the afflicted, to comfort the afflicted and bereaved, to confront the terrorists, and to build a stronger, more tranquil, and happier nation. Fellow Kenyans, as President and Commander-in-Chief of our Defense Forces, I too hurt with you and grieve with you very deeply. I am continuously consulting and continuously reviewing concrete strategies to make every part of this country safe for every Kenyan. I remain confident that our short, medium, and long-term plans are feasible and appropriate, and that in due course our security situation will turn around. My government has invested heavily in terms of increasing the recruitment of security personnel, improving their welfare, providing vehicles for our security services, equipping them with the hardware and technology needed to keep Kenyans safe. We will continue to increase investment in this sector until our country and our citizens are secure. Despite this progress, we also acknowledge some weakness in our security architecture. In light of this, last week I directed my government security actors to engage with members of the relevant committees of the legislature with a view to rectify administrative and legal hurdles that limit our ability to deal with this very real and existential threat that we face. On Thursday this week, I expect a final report of their deliberations and recommendations for my consideration and further action. To this end, I have written to the National Assembly to request that they extend their sitting in order to enable us to deal with this matter conclusively. Recognizing that the war on terrorism requires all of us, I also call upon other arms of government, particularly the judiciary and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, to work with us and to seal all gaps that hinder the effective operations to secure the country. Dear Kenyans, as we intensify the war on terrorism, I acknowledge the thousands of our men and women in uniform. They continue to serve this nation diligently in difficult and trying circumstances. We have lost hundreds of them as they work to defend us. For this reason, I urge all Kenyans to support and to pray for our security forces at all times. Fellow Kenyans, earlier today, I held a meeting with the Inspector General of Police, Mr. David Kimayo, a man who has served this nation with dedication and commitment. Mr. David Kimayo offered to retire, and I have accepted the retirement request. I therefore take this opportunity to thank Mr. David Kimayo for his many years of service to our nation. Further to this, I have today nominated the Honorable Major General Retired Joseph Ngaiseri as the new Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. I hope that the National Assembly will expedite the process of his vetting and approval. Fellow Kenyans, I know that we are all under a lot of pressure, but I appeal to each one of us. This is not the time to be cowed by the enemy. I also call on all leaders to stand together and confront this enemy. This is a war, and a war that we must win. We must win it together. And in times like this, Kenyans must unite and stand for Kenya. I thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you very much.
And the president there perhaps bowing to the pressure and the calls that have been made in the last couple of days by various leaders, including those in ODM, the National Council of Churches of Kenya. David Kimayo, who enjoyed